In a world obsessed with attachment, with being chosen, with never being alone, there exists a different kind of woman. A woman who does not chase love, because she understands something most people never will. Love should feel like freedom, not captivity. They call her a Sigma female. Not because she hates people. Not because she fears connection. But because she refuses to lose herself. Just to keep someone else. Her solitude is not sadness. It is self-respect. How do you love deeply? Without becoming dependent, how do you open your heart? Without handing away your peace, where is the line between connection and emotional surrender? Today, we explore the mind of the Sigma female. The lone wolf who learned that inner peace is more valuable than temporary attention, and why walking alone is sometimes the highest form of strength. Welcome back to Stoic Way. Most people misunderstand the Sigma female. They assume distance means coldness. They assume silence means disinterest. They assume independence means emotional damage. But the truth is far more uncomfortable. She does not avoid love. She avoids the kind of love that asks her to betray herself. And there is a difference. A massive difference. Because the Sigma female understands something painful, many relationships are not built on love. They are built on possession. Control disguised as care. Dependency disguised as devotion. Need disguised as romance. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. That is why she moves differently. She watches. She listens. She studies energy before words. Because words are easy. Anyone can say I care. Anyone can say I love you. But behavior reveals truth. The Sigma female has learned this through pain. Not theory. Pain. Disappointment taught her. Betrayal taught her. Being misunderstood taught her. Giving too much taught her. And little by little, she understood, peace is expensive. And the price is boundaries. That is why she protects her inner world fiercely. Not because she is hard. But because she knows how fragile peace can be. Marcus Aurelius once taught that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Marcus Aurelius understood something timeless: what you allow into your inner world shapes who you become. And Sigma females understand this deeply. That is why they are selective. Selective with people. Selective with love. Selective with access. Because not everyone deserves entry into a peaceful mind. And this confuses people. Especially in a world that worships availability. If you are always there, people call you loving. If you sacrifice constantly, people call you loyal. If you abandon your needs, people call you committed. But the Sigma female asks a dangerous question: at what point does love become self-abandonment? And that question changes everything. Because she has seen what happens when people lose themselves inside relationships. They become smaller, quieter, weaker, less honest, less alive. She refuses that fate. She would rather be alone than emotionally imprisoned. And that decision, that terrifying, powerful decision, is what separates her from most people. Because loneliness does not scare her. Losing herself does. And that is where her peace begins. Not in finding someone, but in finding herself. And refusing to disappear again. But this raises a deeper question: if she values peace so much, why does the world keep calling her cold? That is where part 2 begins. The moment a Sigma female stops abandoning herself for love, the world starts changing its opinion of her. Suddenly, the same boundaries that protect her become attitude. The same silence that protects her peace becomes distance. The same self-respect that rebuilt her becomes ego. Why? Because people often misunderstand what they can no longer access. And access changes perception. Think about it. When you were endlessly available, they called you loving. When you answered immediately, they called you caring. When you sacrificed your peace, they called you loyal. But the moment you stop overgiving, what happens? The labels change. Cold, difficult, different. Why? Because warmth without access confuses people. That is a truth most people never say. The world does not always miss you. Sometimes it misses your availability. It misses your predictability. It misses your emotional openness. And that is not the same as missing you. That realization is painful, because it forces a difficult question: did they love me? Or did they love? How easy I was to reach that question changes everything. Because the Sigma female learns something brutal: some people are comfortable with your wounds, but uncomfortable with your healing. Why? Because healing changes the relationship. A healed woman has standards. A healed woman has boundaries. A healed woman becomes harder to control. And control is often confused with connection. That is the hidden truth. There is an old story about a woman who lived at the edge of a village. She kept to herself, walked alone, spoke little. People called her strange, cold, proud. But one day, a storm hit the village. Chaos, fear, panic. And while everyone else ran in circles, she remained calm, prepared, steady. And suddenly, the same people who called her distant called her strong. What changed? Not her, only their understanding. That is the Sigma female. People often judge her discipline as coldness, because they do not understand what it took to build it. Pain, loss, disappointment, betrayal. The things no one sees. And pain changes how you love. Not less. Differently. Epictetus taught, no person is free who is not master of themselves. That is her strength. Not emotional emptiness. Emotional mastery. That distinction matters. Because mastery looks cold to people ruled by impulse. The world romanticizes emotional chaos. Begging, chasing, explaining, needing, collapsing, calling that passion. But is it passion, or attachment? Is it love or fear of loss? The Sigma female sees the difference now. And because she sees it, she moves differently. She pauses, observes, feels deeply, but chooses carefully. There was a woman named Clara. For years, she gave everything to the people she loved: time, energy, attention, understanding. And everyone loved her for it. Until she changed. She started saying no. Started protecting her peace. Started needing less validation. And slowly, people pulled away. At first, she felt hurt, rejected. But then she understood, some people never connected to your truth. They connected to your availability. And when access changed, Their behavior revealed everything. That realization hurt. But it freed her. Because for the first time, she understood, being loved for what you give is not the same as being loved for who you are. And once you understand that, you stop fearing misunderstanding. Because clarity matters more than approval. And approval is cheap when it costs your peace. But here is where her transformation deepens. Once she stops needing approval, she starts seeing people clearly. Not their words, their patterns, their motives, their hidden intentions. And that changes everything. That is where part 3 begins. Once a Sigma female stops needing approval, something unexpected happens. She starts seeing clearly, not just people, patterns, and patterns reveal everything. Because words can lie, intentions can hide, masks can charm, but patterns always tell the truth. That is what pain taught her. Pain sharpened her perception, in ways comfort never could. Because betrayal changes the eye, disappointment changes the mind, loss changes the way you read people, and once you have been hurt deeply, you stop listening only to what people say, you start watching what they repeat. That is where wisdom begins, not in promises, in patterns. Think about it. Anyone can say, I care. Anyone can say, I'm here for you. Anyone can say, trust me. But what do they repeat? Do they repeat honesty, consistency, respect, or do they repeat confusion, distance, control, mixed signals? Because repeated behavior is the purest form of truth, and the Sigma female understands that now. She no longer gets attached to words, she studies repetition, because repetition reveals character. There is an old saying, once is a mistake, twice is a pattern, 3 times is a choice. That changes how she sees everything, because many people ignore patterns, for the sake of hope that someone will change, hope that love will fix it, hope that time will make it better, but hope without evidence is how people stay trapped. The Sigma female has learned that the hard way. Seneca once wrote, we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and often, imagination is where illusions survive, the imagined future, the imagined loyalty, the imagined potential, but patterns destroy imagination, patterns force reality, and reality is often painful. There was a merchant in ancient Greece, who hired a young assistant. The boy was respectful, polite, reliable, at least at first, but over time, the merchant noticed small things, tiny lies, small excuses, little moments of dishonesty, nothing major, nothing dramatic. His wife told him, you're overthinking, maybe, but patterns matter. Weeks later, the assistant stole from him, and when confronted, the merchant said, I saw it long before it happened, not because he was suspicious, because he was observant. That is the Sigma female. She notices the small fractures before the collapse, the delayed reply that only appears when you need them, the kindness that disappears when you succeed, the affection that feels warm only when you are weak. These things matter because betrayal rarely arrives suddenly, it leaves clues first, and pain teaches you how to see them. That is why Sigma females trust discomfort, not fear. Discomfort, that strange feeling, when something feels off, that tension in your chest, that confusion in your mind. Most people ignore it, explain it away, rationalize it. Why? Because truth is inconvenient, but the Sigma female has learned, confusion is often the first warning, not clarity. Confusion, when words and actions do not match, confusion enters, and confusion is information. There was a woman named Elena. She had a friend for 8 years, laughed together, shared secrets, built trust, or so she thought, but over time, Elena noticed something strange. Every time she struggled, her friend was warm, supportive, present, but every time Elena succeeded, her friend became distant, quiet, cold. At first, Elena ignored it, maybe stress, maybe timing, maybe nothing, but patterns repeat for a reason. One day Elena got promoted, she called her friend, excited, happy, proud, and the response was cold, short, empty, and in that moment, Elena understood, not everyone celebrates your healing. Some people connected to your wounds, because your wounds made them feel needed, but when you rise, the relationship changes. That realization hurt, but it revealed the truth, and truth changes everything. That is why Sigma females see differently now, not through emotion, through observation, not through hope, through evidence, because evidence protects peace, and peace is too expensive to gamble on illusion. But seeing clearly comes with a cost, because once you see patterns, superficial connections become exhausting. Forced conversations, false energy, empty relationships, you start feeling the weight of what is not real, and that changes how you protect yourself. The Sigma female does not just protect her heart, she protects her energy, and that distinction changes everything, because protecting your heart is about avoiding pain, but protecting your energy, that is about protecting your life, your clarity, your peace, your identity. And most people never learn the difference. They let anyone enter their space, anyone enter their mind, anyone influence their emotional state, and then they wonder why they feel drained, why they feel heavy, why they feel lost. But energy is never neutral. Every person you allow close to you leaves something behind: peace, chaos, clarity, confusion, truth, noise. So the question is never, who is around you? The real question is, what do they leave in you after they're gone? That is the question Sigma females ask, and once you start asking it, your whole life changes, because some people do not enter your life to love you, they enter to consume you, your attention, your empathy, your patience, your emotional labor. And the dangerous part, they often look harmless, kind, charming, familiar. That is why energy protection requires awareness, not paranoia, awareness. There is an old story about a gardener who planted rare flowers in his garden. Every day, people came to admire them, some watered them, some respected them, but some picked them just because they were beautiful. And eventually, the gardener built a gate. People asked, why hide something beautiful? And he answered, because not everyone who admires beauty knows how to protect it. That is the Sigma female. She is no longer open to everyone, not because she became closed, because she became discerning, and discernment is expensive, because it forces you to accept that not everyone around you has pure intentions. That truth hurts, especially when it is someone close, a friend, a lover, family, but pain teaches pattern recognition, and pattern recognition teaches protection. This is why Sigma females become highly sensitive to emotional energy, not words. Energy, because words can lie, energy rarely does. Have you ever met someone who smiled at you, but your body felt tense? Have you ever walked away from someone feeling exhausted, without understanding why? That is not random. Your nervous system notices what your mind has not yet accepted, and Sigma females trust that signal, because they have learned, confusion is often the first warning, not clarity. Confusion, when someone's actions and words do not match, confusion appears, and confusion is information. There was a woman named Ava. She had a friend who always sounded supportive, always encouraging, always present, but after every conversation, Ava felt strangely small, drained, heavy. At first, she blamed herself. maybe she was overthinking, maybe she was too sensitive, but over time, she noticed the pattern. Her friends celebrated her pain, but minimized her growth, listened when she was broken, but disappeared when she was rising, and that is when Ava understood. Not everyone is loyal to your healing. Some people connect with your wounds, because your wounds make them feel needed, but when you heal, you become harder to hold. That realization changed her life, because it taught her that access must be earned, not assumed, and this is the turning point for the Sigma female. She stops asking, "How do I keep this connection?" and starts asking, "What is this connection costing me?" That question is powerful, because some connections look harmless, until you calculate the cost, the anxiety, the emotional exhaustion, the constant explaining, the subtle self-betrayal. Too expensive. Epictetus taught that the people around you shape your character, and if that is true, then protecting your energy is protecting your future self. Think about that. Who are you becoming because of the people around you? Calmer or more anxious, stronger or more dependent, clearer or more confused? These questions matter, because the wrong environment can slowly erode you, without dramatic damage, like water against stone, slow, invisible, relentless, and the Sigma female understands this deeply. That is why she leaves quietly, not because she hates people, because she loves herself enough to leave what weakens her. And here is the dark truth: people often call you different. The moment they can no longer drain you, they call it attitude, coldness, distance, but often, it is just self-preservation, and self-preservation is not cruelty, it is wisdom. But protecting your energy creates another problem. The more selective you become, the quieter your world gets, and in that silence, something unexpected begins to happen. Silence stops being empty, it starts becoming a language. Once a Sigma female learns to protect her energy, her world changes, not loudly, quietly. The circle gets smaller, the noise gets weaker, and for the first time in a long time, she can hear herself. That is where silence begins, and silence changes everything, because silence is not empty, it only feels empty to people who are afraid of themselves. Think about that. Why do so many people fear being alone? Why do they keep the TV on, keep scrolling, keep texting, keep filling every moment with noise? Because noise distracts, silence reveals, and what silence reveals is not always comfortable: regret, truth, patterns, wounds, needs, the parts of ourselves we spend years avoiding. That is why silence is difficult. It strips away illusion, and the Sigma female learns, illusion is expensive, it costs peace, it costs clarity, it costs self-respect. So she chooses silence, not because she has nothing to say, because she no longer feels the need to say everything. That is maturity, and maturity often looks like silence, especially in a world addicted to reaction. This is where her power returns, because power is not in reacting, power is in choosing, choosing what deserves your energy, choosing what deserves your words, choosing what deserves your emotion, and most importantly, choosing what deserves nothing at all. That is a dangerous kind of discipline, because most people react automatically. They defend, explain, prove, argue, fight for understanding, but the Sigma female eventually realizes, not everyone misunderstands you by accident, some misunderstand you on purpose, because if they understood you clearly, they could no longer control the story. That changes how she moves. She stops over-explaining, stops defending her boundaries, stops arguing with distortion. Why? Because some battles are designed to drain you, not resolve, and the moment you see that, silence becomes strategy. There is an old story about a warrior who was insulted before battle. The enemy mocked him, provoked him, tried to pull anger out of him, but the warrior stood still. His student asked, "Why don't you respond?" The warrior answered, "The first person to lose control has already lost the fight. That is silence, not weakness, control, and control terrifies people who relied on your reactions, because here is the dark truth. People panic when they can no longer move you, when your anger no longer rises, when your guilt no longer activates, when your attention no longer obeys. That is when they reveal themselves, because silence is where manipulation dies." Read that again. Silence is where manipulation dies, because manipulation needs reaction. Without reaction, it starves. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He wrote, "If you are disturbed, it is not the thing itself, but your judgment about it, that changes everything, because if judgment can be controlled, peace can be protected, and Sigma females build their peace through restraint." There was a woman named Claire. For years, every disagreement with her partner followed the same cycle. He accused, she explained, he twisted, she defended, he escalated, she collapsed, again, and again, and again, until one night, she did something different. Nothing, no explaining, no defending, no emotional wrestling, just silence. At first, he got louder, more aggressive, more desperate. Why? Because control feels strongest right before it dies, and for the first time, Claire saw the truth. The argument was never about resolution, it was about emotional access, and the moment she stopped giving access, the pattern broke. That night changed her life, because she realized, not every conversation deserves your vulnerability, not every person deserves your truth, and not every accusation deserves your energy. That is why Sigma females speak less over time, not because they feel less, because they understand more. They understand that silence protects clarity, protects peace, protects dignity. But here is the danger: silence can heal, but it can also harden. What protects you can slowly isolate you. What saves your peace can build walls around your heart. And that is the next challenge, because pain does not just teach silence, pain teaches survival, and survival changes everything. Before the silence, before the boundaries, before the strength, there was pain, and pain changes people, not always loudly, sometimes quietly, like water entering cracks in stone, slowly, patiently, until one day, the person you used to be, no longer exists. That is how many Sigma females are made, not in comfort, in collapse, because pain does something strange. It doesn't just hurt you, it introduces you to parts of yourself you never knew existed, your limits, your fears, your patterns, your attachments, and sometimes, it destroys the version of you that was never built to survive reality. That destruction feels cruel, but often, it is necessary, because not all versions of you are meant to survive. Think about that. How many parts of yourself were built just to be accepted, to be loved, to be chosen, to avoid abandonment, to avoid rejection? And what happens when life tears those parts away? At first, it feels like death. Not physical death, identity death, and identity death is one of the most painful experiences a person can endure, because who are you? When the thing that defined you disappears, who are you? When the relationship ends, when the loyalty breaks, when the future you imagined collapses. That is where the Sigma female is born. In that space, that terrifying space, between who she was, and who she has not yet become, there is an old story about a blacksmith. A young apprentice once asked, "How do you make steel stronger?" The blacksmith answered, "First, you break its shape." Then he placed the metal into fire, bent it, hammered it, burned it, again, and again, and again. The apprentice looked confused. This looks like destruction, the blacksmith smiled. It is, before it becomes strength, that is pain. Pain is the fire that destroys weak structures, not to punish you, to reveal what can endure. Seneca understood this. He wrote, difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor strengthens the body. Simple, but brutal, because growth is rarely gentle, and healing is rarely graceful. Sometimes healing looks ugly, messy, lonely, confusing. There was a woman named Isabel. At 24, she built her entire identity around being loved, being needed, being chosen. Her relationship became her center, her routine, her future, her emotional home, and then, one day, it ended. No warning, no closure, just absence, and absence is violent, not because it screams, because it leaves silence, where certainty once lived. For months, Isabel replayed everything, the conversations, the memories, the promises, asking herself, what did I miss, what did I do wrong? How do you lose someone who once swore they would stay, but eventually, the better question arrived, not why did they leave, but why did I build my identity around someone else staying? That question changed everything, because it exposed the truth. She was not grieving only the person, she was grieving the version of herself that existed inside that relationship, and that version had to die. That is the hidden truth of pain. Pain is rarely about losing people, it is about losing identities, and rebuilding without them. That rebuilding is where independence begins, not fake independence, not the kind that says, I don't need anyone. Real independence, the kind that says, I can survive disappointment, without collapsing. That is power, because the Sigma female stops waiting to be saved, stops expecting rescue, stops outsourcing stability. She becomes her own foundation, her own safety, her own emotional home, and that changes how she loves. Because now, love is no longer survival, love becomes choice, not need. Choice, that is the highest form of love, but here is the paradox. The stronger pain makes her, the harder she becomes to understand, because people often understand the wounded version of you, not the healed one, and healing changes your language, your boundaries, your standards, your presence. The deeper her independence grows, the more misunderstood she becomes, and this is one of the strangest truths of the Sigma female path. The stronger you become internally, the less readable you become externally. People understand patterns, predictability, reaction, dependence, but what happens when someone no longer reacts the way they expect? What happens when someone does not chase, does not cling, does not beg to be understood? It creates confusion, and confusion makes people uncomfortable, because people often trust what they can predict, and the Sigma female, she stopped being predictable. The moment she stopped building her identity around approval, that is where misunderstanding begins. People see her silence, and call it distance. They see her boundaries, and call it pride. They see her self-respect, and call it ego. But are they seeing her clearly, or only through the lens of what they wanted from her? That question matters, because perception is rarely neutral, it is often shaped by expectation. And when expectations are not met, people create stories. She changed, she became cold, she thinks she's better now. But did she change, or did she simply stop overextending herself? There is a difference, a painful difference. There is an old story of a sculptor who spent years carving stone in silence. Every day, people passed him and mocked his progress. Why so slow? Why so quiet? Why not do it faster? But the sculptor ignored them. Years later, the statue was finished. Magnificent, precise, timeless, and suddenly, the same people admired him. What changed not the sculptor, only their understanding, that is the Sigma female. People judge her during the process, because they cannot yet understand the result. Growth often looks strange, to those committed to comfort, and comfort loves familiarity. That is why when a Sigma female evolves, some relationships crack, not because she became difficult, because her standards changed, and standards expose intentions. A person who respected your chaos, may not respect your boundaries. A person who loved your availability, may resent your absence. A person who benefited from your emotional openness, may feel rejected by your emotional discipline. And here is the hard truth, not everyone wants the healed version of you. Some people preferred the wounded version. Why? Because wounded people are easier to access, easier to influence, easier to keep. Healing changes the dynamic. Epictetus taught that people are disturbed, not by things, but by their perception of things, and perception shapes everything. A Sigma female understands this deeply. She knows she cannot control how people interpret her, only how she carries herself, and that realization is freedom. There was a woman named Rachel. For years, she was the easy one, easy to reach, easy to ask favors from, easy to emotionally lean on. Everyone loved her, until she changed. She started protecting her time, stopped answering immediately, stopped saying yes automatically, stopped making herself endlessly available, and suddenly, people called her selfish. Think about that. When she gave endlessly, she was loved. When she created limits, she was criticized. What changed? Not her value, only her accessibility, and that revealed everything, because some relationships are built on convenience, not connection, and boundaries expose the difference. That is why misunderstanding no longer frightens her, because clarity matters more than approval, and this is where the Sigma female becomes truly dangerous. She becomes comfortable being misread, comfortable being judged, comfortable being disliked, not because she enjoys it, because she understands something. Most people spend their whole lives avoiding being understood by everyone. Often requires betraying yourself, and what is the cost of that? Your truth, your peace, your identity. Too expensive. So she accepts the misunderstanding, quietly, because inner peace does not require universal approval, but there is still a price, a heavy one, because when you stop needing approval, when you stop chasing acceptance, when you become comfortable standing alone, you begin to face a deeper reality. Peace is not free, it costs, and most people are not willing to pay. Everyone says they want peace, but very few people understand what peace costs, because peace is not comfort, peace is expensive, and the Sigma female knows that, because she paid for it, not with money, with endings, with distance, with truth, with letting go of people she once thought would stay forever. That is the first price of peace, loss, because peace often begins where attachment ends, and attachment is seductive. It makes chaos feel familiar, makes inconsistency feel like passion, makes emotional instability feel like love. But is it love, or is it fear, wearing the mask of love? Fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of facing yourself. That is the real trap, because many people stay, not because it is right, but because leaving is terrifying. The Sigma female understands this, because she has faced it, the moment where staying hurts, but leaving hurts more, and in that moment, most people choose comfort. She chooses truth. That choice changes everything. There is an old story about a king, who spent years building a palace, beautiful, massive, safe, but every night, he felt restless. An old traveler visited him and asked, "Why are you unhappy?" The king answered, I built everything I thought would bring peace. The traveler looked around and said, "You built protection, not peace. That is the difference. Protection keeps things out, peace puts things in order, and order requires truth. Truth about people, truth about patterns, truth about what is hurting you, truth about what no longer belongs, and truth is expensive, because truth forces endings." There was a woman named Nora. Her life looked perfect: stable relationship, safe routine, predictable future. From the outside, it looked peaceful, but inside, she felt restless, heavy, disconnected, and one night, sitting beside someone she loved, a terrifying thought entered her mind: what if comfort is the reason I feel stuck? That thought changed everything, because comfort can become a cage, a quiet cage, a familiar cage, and familiar pain is one of the hardest things to leave. Why? Because at least you know it, at least you understand its shape. Uncertainty feels more dangerous, but here is the truth: what is more dangerous, uncertainty or spending years betraying yourself quietly? That question broke her, and freed her. Months later, she left, not because she stopped loving, because she started telling herself the truth, and truth always costs. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He wrote, "If it costs you your peace, it is too expensive." Simple, but brutal. Because peace demands sacrifice, sometimes relationships, sometimes environments, sometimes identities, the people-pleasing version of you, the over-explaining version, the version that tolerated too much, just to avoid being alone. That version cannot come with you. Peace requires evolution, and evolution always feels like loss, before it feels like freedom. That is the hidden price. At first, peace feels lonely, because chaos was crowded, and peace is quiet. At first, peace feels unfamiliar, because suffering was familiar, and familiarity is addictive. But over time, peace becomes home, and once peace becomes home, you stop negotiating with chaos. That is where the Sigma female stands now, no longer choosing comfort over truth, no longer choosing attachment over peace, no longer choosing company over alignment, because she understands something most people learn too late: walking away from what disturbs your soul is not loss, it is self-respect. At the beginning of this journey, we asked a question: how do you love deeply, without losing yourself? And perhaps now, the answer is clearer: you do not lose yourself for love, because love that costs your identity is not love, it is captivity. And the Sigma female understands this now, not because life taught her gently, but because pain taught her clearly. That is the final lesson. The path of the lone wolf was never about escaping love, it was about escaping self-abandonment. There is a difference, a painful difference, because many people spend their lives trying to be chosen, chosen by lovers, chosen by friends, chosen by the world, but very few ask, what happens after you are chosen? If you are no longer yourself, what did you actually win? That question changes everything, because being chosen means nothing if the price is self-betrayal. And this is where the Sigma female arrives, not at loneliness, at truth, truth about love, truth about attachment, truth about peace, truth about herself. And self-knowledge changes everything. There is an old story about a traveler lost in the mountains. For days, he searched desperately for a path, followed voices, followed footprints, followed directions from strangers, but every road took him further away. Exhausted, he stopped, sat down, became still, and in that stillness, he noticed something: the river, flowing beside him the entire time. And he remembered, rivers always lead somewhere, so instead of chasing voices, he followed the river, and it led him home. That is the Sigma female journey. At first, she followed voices, opinions, expectations, approval, fear, but eventually, she stopped, got quiet, and listened to something deeper, herself, and that changed the direction of her life, because sometimes, the way home, is not louder, it is quieter. That is why walking alone, is not always loneliness, sometimes, it is alignment, alignment with truth, alignment with peace, alignment with who you really are. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He wrote, "Look within, within is the fountain of good." Simple, but powerful, because everything the Sigma female searched for, peace, clarity, stability, worth, was never outside of her, it was buried beneath fear. Beneath attachment, beneath noise, and solitude uncovered it. That is the paradox, the thing most people fear, being alone, became the thing that freed her. There was a woman named Lena. For years, she feared silence, feared distance, feared empty rooms, because empty rooms felt like rejection, so she stayed too long, in relationships, in friendships, in places that no longer fit, not because they were right, because they were familiar, but familiar pain, is still pain, and one day, everything ended, the relationship, the circle, the comfort, and for the first time, there was nothing left to hold, only herself. At first, that broke her, but then, slowly, it rebuilt her, and one morning, walking alone, with no messages to answer, no expectations to meet, no one to impress, she felt something strange, peace, not because someone gave it to her, because no one could take it anymore. That is freedom, and real love, the kind worth keeping, never asks you to abandon that. Freedom, because love should feel like expansion, not confinement, like truth, not fear, like peace, not possession. That is the final truth. The lone wolf does not walk alone, because she has no one, she walks alone, because she finally understands, peace is sacred, freedom is sacred, and the self you fought to rebuild, is sacred too. So if you are walking alone right now, ask yourself, is this loneliness, or is this transformation, is this emptiness, or is this space, making room for your real life? Because sometimes, walking alone, is not losing the world, it is finally finding yourself, and once you find yourself, you stop begging to be found by others. Thank you for walking this path, with Stoic Havenway. If this message found you, at the right moment, subscribe, and keep protecting your peace, because the strongest form of love, is the kind that lets you remain free.